interject throughout the webinar today. So quick agenda points that we're going to tick off at the moment. We'll talk a little bit about the modern workforce and how it's changed fundamentally in the last 20 to 30 years. We'll look at barriers to workforce unity. So what's really preventing people from working together and maximizing the output of the group. We'll look at the role of online communities at addressing some of those barriers to workforce unity. We'll talk about driving ROI, or activities that improve your return on investment for labor spend. And last, a quick brief discussion on whether communities are right for you in your own organization. And then again, any questions that may pop up. So let's talk real quick about the modern workforce, a subject that I think most people acknowledge has changed, but we often take for granted how fundamental those changes are. So everyone would agree that most organizations are suffering some increasing stress with aligning their workforce to their business objectives, whether that's increasing cycle time to hire, or increasing volatility of the workforce, or increasing turnover. The point is there's a growing disconnect with how we need to apply labor inside an organization and how we currently apply labor from a systems perspective. That's not really a surprise to folks who are in organizational development or talent strategy, because the vast majority of business models, business practices, institutions, and regulations that govern how organizations use talent, not just in the U.S., but around the world, were really developed in the previous age. They were built for the industrial era, and it's out of alignment with how we currently work today, largely due to two issues. Today, there's a fundamental change in the number of labor types in use by the modern organization, and the percentage of the workforce that's involved in knowledge work has significantly grown. So today, if we take a look at what a knowledge worker looks like, you can see here kind of in the background an office environment. You would expect most of the people sitting behind a computer to be knowledge workers, but a knowledge worker is really anyone who primarily works with information, or who develops and uses knowledge in the workplace. And while we may not think of it, how about a mechanic or a line technician working on an automotive production line? Is that person a knowledge worker? Or how about the cheesemonger at a Wegmans cheese shop? Is that person a knowledge worker? And the short answer to that question is yes in both cases. Many people are enamored with Tesla cars at the moment. They've won the most number of awards for both well manufacture and consumer value. What very few people realize about Tesla is that the manufacturing process, or the production line, changes daily as a result of iteration or innovation, largely brought on by its contractor assembly workforce. Vast majority of employees working on the assembly line in a Tesla plant are contract employees. They are responsible for taking iterations in design of Tesla cars from the design function through manufacturing, and then incorporating new ways to introduce those design changes from a manufacturing perspective on the line on a day-to-day basis. So today, organizations are built significantly of knowledge workers, and those knowledge workers have numerous roles within the organization. Some are employees, some are consultants, some work with the organization on a temporary basis, others are limited duration contractors, some are strategic partners. Costco, for example, uses a significant number of labor providers from strategic partners to both demonstrate and sell products in its wholesale warehouses. And then by far the largest category of labor outside of the employee population in many large organizations is the outsourced or insourced service provider, who may sit right next to an employee in any organizational environment. If we take a look at some of the changes from a talent perspective of the modern workforce, this is an article that was published back in April by Dan Schabel at Bloomberg Businessweek. And he brought up 5 points that are kind of interest from a talent perspective and also from an employer perspective. Dan indicated that all jobs are temporary. And if we look at how organizations apply labor, a significant number of organizations are moving talent more and more frequently throughout the organization. So where I may be hired for one job, it's entirely possible within a calendar year I'll be doing an entirely different job, possibly in an entirely different function. His second point was, don't let job descriptions confine you. Anyone who's worked in a professional environment would most likely say that their job description doesn't remotely define their role. And that's because the nature of work is changing so frequently that a static job description, often developed years prior to someone occupying a role, is now significantly out of date. His third point, and one that we need to keep in context, is that your context or your Rolodex is more important than your knowledge base. So with information becoming obsolete at an ever-increasing rate, it's not about necessarily what you know or what you have learned. It's really about your ability to surface and discover information relevant to today and tomorrow. And that means having a network that can help you comb through information in the era of information overload. Fourth, your experiences matter more than your title. Today, there are interns in many organizations executing significant knowledge work on behalf of their organizations. They're building tacit knowledge that in days gone by would have very easily walked out of the organization. So a title no longer really emphasizes a person's value to an organization or characterizes the type of work they may or may not have been doing. We have a question at this point. Darren?
Hi. The question is around how do you make your professional development here public based on if your job description is confining, how do you make sure that what you've learned in your work environment, that's public so that other people are aware of it?
It's a good question, and it's one that we're going to speak to kind of throughout the hour. More and more organizations are engaging in work that is transparent or visible, not only to their customers but to the general public. The advance of microblogging technologies and blogging and, more importantly, mobile technologies are really helping employees surface information about the type of work they're doing, the type of learning they're doing on an ongoing basis, ever present, omnipresent. And so in many cases, it's not just about encouraging employees and encouraging organizations to be transparent. It's about supporting that flow of information. And we'll talk about that throughout the hour. The fifth point before we jump forward is that the personal reputation is the greatest asset. So I have, throughout my career, written a number of things. And if I Google myself, some of the things that surface are 10+ years old. There's no escaping them. They're always going to be tied to my professional reputation. So as the internet has become more mature, so too has the ability for reputation to become more encompassing, more evolved. And how individuals manage that is very quickly becoming the greatest asset, more so than a collection of experiences and learning that's documented. I'm not going to read this quote, but it's here for those of you who would like to read it, and it will be in the slides later. But this is John Hagel, who some people may recognize. He's the former head of the strategy unit for McKinsey Consulting. He's now the co-chairman for the Deloitte Center of Edge Innovation here in the Silicon Valley. And he brought up a very important point. We often talk about the internet and how it has changed organizations. But the internet has changed the world for individuals just as much as it has for organizations. Talented professionals today, no matter where they sit in the world, are competing against one another. And they're competing in an era where the talents they have a very short shelf life. John argues that the typical shelf life for knowledge and skills is about 5 years. And so that if an individual is not continuously learning or improving their performance, they very quickly get marginalized and burn out or drop out of society. or drop out of the workforce. And this is something we see today. So there's an ongoing debate as to whether or not there's a true talent shortage. And if we look at the statistics, the answer is no. There's actually not a talent shortage. What there is a shortage of people willing to occupy the jobs that call for specialized knowledge and skills that organizations demand today. There's a number of stats that show 40% of graduates who pursue education in science, technology, engineering, and math professions or subjects are not employed in science, technology, engineering, or math roles 5 years post-graduation. There's a significant exodus of people with specialized skills and knowledge from the professions that use that skill and knowledge. And part of it has to do with that ongoing disconnect between how organizations use labor and how labor exists to be consumed by the market. So let's just really quickly jump into a point. For those of us who've been in talent for a while, one of the things we acknowledge is that understanding the business, knowing an organization's goals, its objectives, and establishing a shared mindset around that has long been a critical success factor for successful managers and successful leaders in the modern enterprise. 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, Robert Kaplan and David Norton, who were the inventors of the balanced scorecard, introduced some research that said less than 7% of the workforce felt they fully understood their company's business strategy and what was expected of them in order to help achieve company goals. And this was 12 years ago. So you're talking about a significant time. Recent research from the Palladium Group, which is founded by Robert and David, indicate that that percentage has now dropped to less than 5% of employees associated with an organization are fully aware of and understand their role in helping their organization achieve their business strategy. Given that most companies suffer from a lack of communication, that's not overwhelmingly surprising. What is even more surprising is that similar research found that only 40% of managers in the modern organization have a clear understanding of their organization's strategy and therefore how to align their own workforces to contribute to that organizational strategy. We have a question coming in at that point.
This question is two parts. One is, can you give some ideas on what the basic understanding, so company goals, is that, what exactly do you mean by that? And two, who has done this well? Do you have an example of an organization where a larger part of the employee population actually knows what the company goals are and what the strategic direction they're going in?
Thanks, Darren. I'll answer the latter question first and then the first one. So organizations that do this well, I think CDW, the discount wholesaler of consumer electronics, probably does this one of the best in the world at this. They're fully transparent with regards to the objectives of the organization. They're documented. They're shared in multiple formats. They're the basis of every aspect of training in the organization. And in essence, their goals and each individual's contribution to those goals is omnipresent throughout the organization. In terms of the first question as to what this looks like, it really does come down to understanding how the business produces value for its customers. If I work in an oil refinery, what is my product? And what do I do to the inputs that come into the business to make the output more valuable for consumers, and what's the value of that to the market? Very few people understand how their companies or how their organizations produce value. And that's what a clear understanding of an organization's strategy entails. The further to that is understanding specifically how I contribute to producing that value. Some folks call this walking the talent downstream or upstream. If you're customer facing, let's walk upstream and introduce how we transform raw materials to produce value, or how we transform information in a service business to produce value. If someone works very high in the organization, let's walk them downstream and show them the impact of their work on the final audience. So some research along these same lines from the Towers-Watson ROI study said that organizations that do this most effectively, like CDW, provide a 26% total return on shareholders compared to the organizations who do this very poorly, providing a negative 15% return on total investment. I believe we have a follow-up question.
Yeah, going back to what you said just a moment ago, there was a question about, how do you start introducing this to an organization? This particular question comes from somebody who says they do it very poorly. They expect their numbers to be lower than what you presented here. And curious as to how do you fix that? What's the best path to starting to introduce kind of the strategy of the company to the employees so they actually start to embrace it?
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a little bit in more detail, but kind of the short answer really is increasing the scope of communication. Many organizations have layers, and when we talk about the flat organization, the truth is the truly flat organization is not that common. So decreasing the barriers to communication between, for lack of a better word, the top and the bottom of the organization is by far one of the best ways at doing this, but also increasing communication channels whereby information can be easily surfaced for the employee population or easily discovered by the employee population will also go a long way towards communicating this. In the hospitality industry, one way they do this is through something called pre-shifts, which is when, if I've got 35 people coming on to the floor at a 3 o'clock shift, from 3 o'clock to 3:15, there'll be a team meeting in which they'll talk about, what are the key customer groups on the property that day? What are the key objectives for different segments of the workforce? How is that going to translate into the property's goals for that period of time? So just simply sharing information and breaking it down to a local level goes a long way to helping achieve this. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress. Great question. Okay, so the sum of it is that a workforce that's lacking a shared mindset operating in a rapidly changing world means lost productivity or diminished ROI on labor spend. And I'm quite fond of some quotes, so we'll wrap up this section with just 3 quick ones. This one from Warren Venus says, "None of us is as smart as all of us." Again, speaking to the fact that no one person can possess all the knowledge that a group possesses and therefore make informed decisions as equal in quality and caliber. Malcolm Gladwell said that innovation is fundamentally social. And Clay Shirky, who wrote Here Comes Everybody, said that many jobs we often regard as single contributor roles or single mind roles actually require a crowd to be successful. And just keep those 3 quotes in mind as we look at how to connect and unify the workforce. All right, so let's talk real quick about barriers and in the modern organization and how they get in the way of talent being able to effectively collaborate and work together. Physical is a no-brainer. It's the #1 barrier that disconnects folks. And so it's also a no-brainer then as to why an online community may be a solution to address barriers to workplace unity. But it's not just location that's a physical barrier. A lot of organizations build their campuses or their offices in such a way that don't promote the movement of talent throughout the organization or drive collaboration of organizations. Others exist. It could simply be commute, where people flex their schedules to either avoid a commute or mitigate the impact of a commute, having an impact on how much time employees are exposed to one another in a workplace. So there's several barriers that do that. Second barrier is structural. And this really comes down to the different labor types that are present in an organization. If we look at the contingent workforce, it's administered by the procurement function in most organizations. If we look at the employee workforce, it's administered by HR. If we look at outsourced service providers, in-source service providers, and consultants, there's very little oversight or governance that isn't delivered by the internal customer directly. So siloed administration and different systems to communicate with different populations are structural barriers to workplace unity. Another one is outdated regulatory compliance. So if I have a large contractor workforce, they're technically not my employees, and therefore training those employees is a compliance issue. It's really the responsibility of the firm I've hired to train that workforce. So when I've got multiple stakeholders involved in keeping everyone on the same page, there's a natural opportunity for breaks in shared mindset to occur. Perceptual barriers, these often go unnoticed, but these are management practices, either systemic or individual, i.e. manager performance. If you've got a manager who talks very openly about an open door policy and communicating freely and honest feedback, but then has systemically penalized elements of the workforce for doing just that, then you're creating a perceptual barrier to workplace unity. Cultural, in a shrinking world, it's not just about someone's culture being a barrier to workplace unity. Sometimes it has to do with acceptable flow of information. In some cultures, it's not acceptable for an employee to inform a manager because it insinuates the manager isn't paying attention and therefore hasn't discovered an issue that an employee may have uncovered. So addressing some of those cultural barriers that prevent sharing of information and sharing of knowledge is a key barrier to driving workplace unity. Language is really no longer a dividing issue with regards to barriers in the workplace. A number of online translation tools and the global adoption of English as a universal language for business have really mitigated language as the top barrier. However, manufactured jargon remains a key issue. Many organizations use acronyms internally. They use jargon that's been manufactured by the employee population. And so when you have a lot of workers in your labor force coming from different areas, that jargon gets in the way of helping those various labor types communicate effectively. And then interpersonal self-image and prejudices against knowledge sharing and sources of information, also a barrier to workplace unity. So with those in mind, there's really two things that are required to overcome those barriers. The first is organizations need to create, build, and sustain and help employees expand relationships among everyone that makes up the workforce. And that means helping individuals gain access to tacit knowledge and sources. So tacit knowledge is simply knowledge that sits in the minds of other individuals and that cannot be easily transferred. If I can sit down in 5 minutes and write a series of instructions on how to achieve something, that's not tacit knowledge, that's explicit knowledge. And that's the type of knowledge you can very easily discover from reading a blog post or watching an online video or going through a small mini training course. This is really speaking about helping individuals in your workplace discover other folks in the workplace that may have knowledge relevant to their activities more easily. The second one does relate to that explicit knowledge, and that is about helping individuals in an era of information overload really discover the information they need to without having to invest more time. Anyone who's ever been tasked with a stretch project has probably spent hours online trying to discover relevant information related to that task project. Intel is quite famous for sharing with its workforce a few years ago that the average employee spent 20% of their time on the job, 1 day a week, simply trying to find information or subject matter experts internally to support their work. That's 20% time, which is essentially lost opportunity or lost productivity because the organization's practices at helping individuals find, discover, and connect to sources of information were broken. The answer from the community of information professionals to this is that a new work model is needed inside the modern organization. And that model requires some cultural transformation. And these are words that most people have probably heard before with regards to the social space. Increasing transparency, a workforce that's participative and engaged in knowledge sharing and continuous learning and conversation and communication. Access to a workforce that's always on or always in. And that speaks to the importance of mobile and supporting mobile communications and mobile knowledge sharing and mobile knowledge discovery. Mass customization. We've become accustomed via social media to a view of the world that is specifically custom to us. My Facebook feed is not the same as your Facebook feed. What I see on Twitter is not the same as what you see on Twitter. What I see when I turn on my news reader or I log into the internet and I read news is not the same as what you see. We've become accustomed to mass customization, and we expect it in every aspect of our daily lives. A workforce that's agile and can apply skill sets across the organization, across cross-functional boundaries, and in functions where we might not have typically looked at that skill set before. Competency-driven outsourcing. This is becoming far, far more common as we break work up into smaller and smaller chunks. I need to find somebody who has this particular competency instead of trying to group multiple competencies into a job profile, that finding someone perfect to do all of those things is very rare. I'm breaking work into smaller and smaller segments. And then that last point there under culture is strategic collective intelligence, finding a way to get everybody on the same page at the same time. Question there, Aaron.
So this question is around articulating what the lost, apparently in this question, and I'm summarizing it, is so how does this HR person says clearly they don't have this unified vision for where the company is going, and there's different ways in which they're trying to overcome it, but they don't know how to talk about it in dollars. What's the easiest way to quantify what the real issue is? What are the key indicators so they can go back to their leadership and say, this is affecting us negatively because of this? And if there are any.
It's a great question. Because every organization presents slightly different scenarios, it's very difficult to say this is the one way you do this. But in short, finding out what percentage of the workforce is investing time in discovery and what percentage of that discovery is duplicative effort. A great one that I see in organizations all the time is in a team of 15 people, Lily may find and discover an exceptional piece of information. And in most organizations, email is how that information gets shared. So Lily shares that phenomenal piece of insider information with the 2 or 3 people in her group that she's closest to. But there's 17 people in that group, which means there's 14 people who didn't benefit from that discovery. And we can look at what percentage of other folks in that group also discovered the same piece of information and what the lag between those 2 discoveries were, and how long does it take for that phenomenal piece of information to become omnipresent across all 17 members of that team, if ever. GE did a study very similar to this in which they introduced best practices in one regional office. And their whole purpose was to see how quickly would knowledge of those best practices spread throughout the regional offices within that business unit. And what they found is that it never spread completely throughout all of the regional offices. What typically happened is it made it to 1 or 2 offices, generally those with closest proximity to the office where the information was first introduced, but that it never spread throughout the organization entirely. And that is an exercise that's repeated in many, many organizations. So you can test it by introducing knowledge and seeing how quickly knowledge spreads throughout the organization, and then look at what the impact of that knowledge would be on workplace productivity. So great functions to try this in are marketing and sales functions, where you've got a relatively short cycle time to produce results, and best practice knowledge or information that's valuable to that audience that improves productivity can be seen very, very quickly. That's the easiest way to do it on a company-by-company example. There are larger case studies that demonstrate that simply doing this versus not doing it produce a difference in total return on shareholder value. And those are studies like the Towers-Watson ROI study that point to the importance of shared mindset and the importance of communication in producing results. A study just done recently indicated that organizations that do develop a shared mindset and engage their workforce towards a common goal produce 3 times the shareholder value as organizations that don't do that effectively. So you can either use the external studies as your business case, or if you need to prove internally that doing this would be successful, those tests are probably the best method of doing that. Technology requirements. And again, this is coming from information professionals. To truly support this culture that's been described, organizations have to introduce some technology that is deliberately available and internal to drive social collaboration and emergent knowledge sharing. That speaks to exactly what the other premise of today's webinar is, and that is the application of online communities to this problem. So online communities aren't new, and the concept of community isn't new. It's been around since the dawn of man. Anytime it's easier for a group of people to produce greater output than a single individual, communities generally form. And so all organizations today are communities in their own right, and there's a good chance there are communities within the organization. Why online communities really help address the issue of workplace unity is that they're flexible. They're extensible environments. So I may be a person who is an Uber participant, and my colleague, Charles, may not be an Uber participant. And so an online community lets each of us approach the community environment using our own work styles. It's amenable to us. Online communities, because of the nature of the internet, are accessible, which means I can be a member of the community. I can be participating during my commute to work, offline, while I'm out of the office, while I'm on vacation, although don't encourage that latter one. Online communities are omnipresent. They're accessible. It's a familiar environment. So the online communities that drive collaboration in the workplace today are very different than the virtual offices and the intranets of 10 years ago. Today they look a lot like Facebook. They feel a lot like Facebook, and they deliver a lot of the functionality that members in the workforce have become accustomed to. The other thing that online communities do is that they improve the return on an individual's contributions. So as I was developing this webinar today, I shared various points via several online communities that I belong to, and I got instantaneous feedback on how to change this point or how to address that point, or what people in my network felt would require more collaboration or more elaboration. So communities help improve the work product of individual contributions by giving them an audience to test that before they have to deliver a final work product. Online communities have a low barrier to interaction. It's easy to interact, it's easy to facilitate, and they support serendipitous discovery, not just of information that's valuable to an individual, but also of individuals who have knowledge relevant to an individual's work. In essence, they do what we need them to do, and that is they connect all the various resources that make up an organization in a way that knowledge can share across resource type, across geographic borders, across language barriers, across cultural barriers. They let employees find and connect with people that they need to, where information sits and where tacit knowledge sits, so that that knowledge can begin to transfer. They help employees in the workforce become aware of what others are doing. I remember when I first started my career, I worked with Cisco Systems, and in helping find someone a role at Cisco, I discovered that there were 4 groups at Cisco working on essentially the same piece of technology. And when I asked them about each other, I found that of the 4 groups, none of them knew about each other. There was no discovery that other people in the organization were attempting to do roughly the same thing. So there was no knowledge sharing, there was no best practice sharing, there was no discovery. The online communities also enable the employees to rapidly distribute ideas, experience, and knowledge to drive innovation. And when necessary, they enable resources inside the organization to tap knowledge in their informal network. So a lot of times I'm tasked with achieving something I've never done before. And my first response is to reach out to my network and say, who's done this? Where can you point me for guidance? What are the things that I may overlook? What's going to help me be successful at achieving this? That's why online communities have become critical in this massive world of various labor types. Question at that point, Darren.
Yeah, here's a question with regard to you referencing your personal and professional use of online learning communities in preparation for this webinar. Wanting to know specifically which ones did you use and how did you become aware of them?
Again, great question. All networks have different purposes. So, if I look at the public networks like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, Facebook is where I share and discuss things more intimately with a closer network of professionals. While I have 500 plus friends on Facebook, I can recall personal details about virtually everyone I'm connected to. And so I engage in tighter discussions there. So I did share specific points on Facebook and got feedback and incorporated that into this. Twitter I don't use for that mechanism, and that's not the way an organization would use Twitter. Twitter is used to index or share information people have found of value. It's an ongoing stream of content. And so in preparation for this webinar, I did look to see what are some trending topics related to what we're discussing, and what are the resources that my network are pointing people to with regards to those topics. LinkedIn, on the other hand, again, is not one where I share intimate details. While I am connected to everyone that I'm connected to on LinkedIn, I don't know personal details about that audience. It's a broader audience for me. There's a lot of folks on LinkedIn from a lot of different circles of my life. And so there I look more to find individuals that I may want to reach out to on a one-on-one basis. It's what I use for contacts. So LinkedIn indexes my professional world. Twitter gives me insight into what they're sharing of general value. Facebook gives me access to an online audience that's always there. And BraveNewTalent gives me a greater place to discuss knowledge specifically around professional topics that are driving my performance or my productivity. So I use 4 networks in wildly different ways. The next topic that we'll hit on to, and then we'll probably jump into some remaining questions, value drivers for an online community. This comes up all the time. I love the idea of connecting all of these people around my workforce, but how am I going to prove to my company that this is a valuable endeavor? And there's essentially 4, and I'm just going to highlight them all, and then we'll talk to them real quick. Improved efficiency and effectiveness of the workforce. So reduce training costs, number 1. Most organizations continue to spend, I believe the total to be spent on training and development in the U.S. this year is $68 billion. Will be spent on corporate training and development. Online communities make information discovery real-time, and we know that the vast majority of employees need to learn on a real-time basis. So facilitating an online community can reduce an organization's dependence on traditional classroom or formal learning environments. It's faster response to real-time learning needs. I'm given a stretch assignment. It's entirely feasible that my organization isn't going to have any formal learning and development available for me related to that stretch assignment that's available today, nor is a public conference going to do that or another training opportunity going to do that. I'm going to have to piece together my own course and my own learning in real time. And online communities can help me discover not only the information, but also the subject matter experts that can inform that stretch assignment. And it's going to give me access to diverse perspectives, which are going to ensure that however I approach my stretch assignment has been bulletproofed or tested against a variety of different perspectives. Innovation. So problems surface through trending conversations. If anyone here on the call works in talent acquisition or in employment branding or marketing, you know that when you monitor conversations that are happening across different silos of the audience, things that start to trend, you can identify as emerging issues in the organization long before they become emergent issues. Diverse perspectives from the talent ecosystem. If your talent ecosystem includes strategic partners and contractors and consultants, they see a broader variety of solutions and can therefore incorporate learnings from other organizations into innovative solution development. Elimination of layers speeds execution. I saw this one a lot in my work with Whirlpool. Through their ideation process, employees are actually encouraged to introduce innovations into the organization. But the ideation process then took that innovation and moved it through 7 layers of internal communication, in which those perceptual biases and prejudices would influence or change the suggested innovation as it moved through those layers. So elimination of layers can speed execution significantly, therefore decreasing cycle time to market for innovations in an organization. Workforce engagement, discovery and development of a support network. Much like I mentioned with Cisco Systems, it's entirely possible that other people in the organization are working through assignments and stretch projects very similar to what an employee may be doing or a contractor may be doing without any knowledge of one another. So online communities help those individuals who are working in similar collaborative ways discover and develop together. There's greater visibility into work across the organization. We know that the vast majority of employees who leave an organization are leaving because of a misalignment with their current line manager or with the nature of the work they're doing, not because of the organization in general. So providing greater visibility into the work across the organization helps people facilitate movement easier and more frequently throughout the organization, providing better alignment of my skills to my work. And then that latter one, increased conversion of fringe talent. Many organizations do exciting things, but because we try to communicate in broadcast mechanisms, it's difficult to bring that excitement to the market. So if there is highly valuable talent out there that is interested in the organization but isn't motivated to drive conversion and become an applicant or a contractor or a consultant, exposing them to the conversations and to the nature of the work going on inside the organization can help drive conversion of that fringe talent that's highly valuable to the organization. The last value driver is true branding, and that is a lot of organizations are investing in employment branding on the premise that they are one thing to everyone. And the truth is, working in the finance function of Intel is very different than working in a production department at Intel. The cultures are different. The management practices are different. The benefits or the value proposition of being employed by Intel are fundamentally different in those groups. Online communities expose those differences. They make those organizational differences transparent to the audience and therefore help deliver a more localized employment brand to specific talent populations. Question?
This question is around how difficult is this to do? Is this to build an online community and manage it, and get the subject matter experts from within the organization to contribute? Is this like a full-time person? Is this part-time person? And who normally within the organization actually does this work? Is this marketing, HR?
I'm going to give you the consultant answer first and say it depends on the size of the organization. But the more general answer is building a community or supporting an online community does require some upfront investment. However, Once you've engaged an audience, and some subset of your audience is going to be highly engaged, another subset of your audience is going to be actively engaged, but not highly engaged, and there's going to be some set of your audience that never engages in online community. That's just the nature of how it works. Once you get that highly engaged population up to a significant size, or what we call critical mass, the community really takes on a life of its own. And at that point, the community stewards or the community managers can step back, and their role becomes not driving day-to-day activity, but influencing day-to-day activity. And that's done, it's much less labor intensive once you reach that point. That's done through introduction of very targeted pieces of content designed to influence the audience in one direction or another, or through reinforcing or recognizing positive behaviors in a community environment and addressing negative behaviors in an environment. And so that will help the organization direct its community in a particular direction and increase the value of the community to the organization. So the short answer is yes, there are resources required, and for the average organization, it's going to be a full-time job for a community manager for the first couple weeks, possibly the first 2 to 3 months, until that community reaches critical mass, and then the requirements from a community management basis decrease over time as value production increases and is transferred to the community itself. Again, another great question. Follow up on that. No, we're good. Okay, so I'm not going to read this slide because there's obviously a lot of text on this slide, and everyone on the call, having looked at the attendee list, is fairly intelligent and can deal with this one. Six quick steps to increasing the ROI of an online community or a unified workforce. The first one there, align your talent ecosystem, really just speaks to helping everyone come together in a forum where they can share information. It's reducing those barriers to communication and driving some affinity towards a common set of data or goals. Second one, improving talent collaboration. This is one that every organization can benefit from. If I look at my day-to-day activities, there's a subset of them that I simply don't enjoy. And for everyone on the call, it's probably the same. The way we've grouped work together, oftentimes we're tasked with doing some things we really enjoy, some things we tolerate, and some things we don't enjoy at all. So improving talent collaboration really speaks to helping people in the organization connect around what they're most passionate about and apply more of their time to those activities, because that will increase the overall productivity of the workforce. Increasing workplace productivity. This is about improving the return on discovery, helping employees find information faster, and reduce the actions required to reach a subject matter expert in an organization. So at Intel, this was about making subject matter experts highly visible and highly connected within the enterprise, so that employees didn't have to spend 20% of their time discovering who has this piece of information, where do they sit, how do I get in contact with them. Driving innovation. This is challenging the crowd to do work and provide insights. This is allowing and encouraging employees to learn from others' mistakes, so sharing. We tried that. This is where we went wrong, and this is what I would do differently if I had to do it again. Encouraging that type of sharing really is about recognizing and rewarding people for failure, because there is learning in failure. And when you include your external ecosystem in that, your customers, your strategic partners, again, the perspectives just exponentially increase, giving organizations a war chest of information on how to behave and perform better in the future. Developing the ecosystem. This is about realizing that your community today may not be the community you need tomorrow. And so once you've got an engaged audience, this is about curating content and producing content to inform that audience how best to transform itself to meet your future needs. These are those pivotal pieces of content you introduce into the community to influence the community in a particular direction. And then once you've done those pivotal pieces, let the crowd surface the background information to support that greater premise, promote subject matter experts within the organization, and reward best practices. And then that last one is evolving your ecosystem. And that really speaks to influencing the hard to acquire, those folks you need inside your organization, building a specific experience that rewards them for participating in the community before they've joined the organization. That's pre-onboarding external talent, getting them to contribute and collaborate on work projects, ultimately improving new hire success and conversion of those hard-to-hire resources. I'll end on this, and then I think we have time for a couple of follow-up questions, but this just speaks to our community's right for you. And the short answer is, if you're looking to expand on Q&A inside the organization, drive advocacy, help employees find experts, and improve innovation, then community is probably the right type of social media to drive those activities in your organization. If you're looking to drive just awareness, social networks may serve a better purpose for you. If you're looking to drive team collaboration, group environments and collaboration tools may be the better option for you. But if it's advocacy and subject matter experts and expertise finding and knowledge sharing and continuous learning and innovation and Q&A, then a community environment is probably the right type of social media property for your organization to invest in. At that point, I'm going to stop speaking and answer questions. Darren.
So the first question, and we only have 2 minutes left. The first question is with regard to, is emailing or being part of an email list, is that considered a community, and why not? Or why not, rather?
Yeah, I'm sure everyone on this call has been part of an email chain that started out between a few people and grew to include a few more people and had attachments in various distributions here and there. And they've probably all experienced at some point in time somebody hits reply instead of reply to all, and so part of the conversation gets lost and the attachments get lost and they're stored in different places. Email chains are not a community environment. They don't enable you to discover other people with shared interests or shared knowledge if you're not part of that chain already. In many ways, they are a network of communications between 2 or more people. So email doesn't count as a community environment. In fact, they're the antithesis of community because instead of surfacing information, they bury information in threaded discussions and inboxes. Good question.
And the final question is with regard to your source, your sources. There was a note about you've pulled from, Towers Perkin and some other industry leaders. Where should they go to find more current information on talent communities?
So they can stay tuned to our Twitter channel. They can also follow talent communities on BraveNewTalent as a terminology, and we surface some articles there that are highly relevant. So follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. Join BraveNewTalent and follow the term talent community. There are also a wealth of industry experts which we reference from time to time. So when we retweet or share a piece of information from someone in our network, following those individuals is highly valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Master. At this time, we're out of time. As I mentioned earlier, we have recorded this session, and you will receive not only the deck, but the recording if you want to take a look at it in the future. In addition, we will be having future webcasts, as Master mentioned. We'll be promoting those to you in the future if you'd like to participate. Thank you for your hour, and we look forward to talking to you shortly. Have a great day.